Mornings before school at our house used to be the stuff of nightmares. Far too often we'd wake up late, myself included, then scramble to find clean uniforms, eat breakfast, and pack lunches. There was always at least one child searching for a shoe, and often one trying to finish homework he'd forgotten to do. On one particularly memorable morning, I realized 5 minutes before we had to be out the door that one of my sons was still in bed. I roused him, grabbed a uniform so we could change into it in the car, handed him a bar to eat on the way, and we headed to school. When it was our turn in the drop-off line, all the kids piled out, except for the sleepyhead. I turned around to see what the holdup was, and I saw a manifestation of one of the most classic nightmares of all. The kid literally went to school with no pants on. He sat there with his skinny bare legs and a sheepish grin, and he said, can we go back home and get my pants? I could hardly be mad when I was laughing so hard. We found his pants on the garage floor. He had dropped them in his haste to get to the car. We drove back to school, and I walked him into the office. I waited until he was out of earshot, and then I couldn't resist sharing our story with the office staff, who thought it was just as hilarious as I did. My kids have forgotten a lot of things, even shoes, but this was a first. This is the How She Moms podcast, where we talk about how different moms solve the same problems. I'm Whitney Archibald, a mother of 5 kids myself. I collect ideas so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. You may have noticed in my intro that I said mornings used to be terrible at our house. I'm happy to report that my use of the past tense was intentional. Mornings are actually quite pleasant now, even though all 5 of my kids are in school now, from middle school down to preschool. What brought about this great change, you might ask? Science. Once I realized how ridiculous our mornings had gotten, I put my mad scientist hat on and decided to deconstruct all of the recurring problems and conduct some new experiments to see if we could change our morning formula. If you prefer, you could also think of yourself as a designer or an engineer, sniffing out the problem spots in your household routines and figuring out a solution. I like to think of my house as my laboratory. And one of the best ways to experiment is with daily routines. In the morning, after school, and at bedtime. They're self-contained periods of time in which specific things have to happen, but there are endless variations of how those things can happen. If one part of my day is particularly dysfunctional, and there's always something, I analyze it, identify the major pain points, and try different solutions until I find one that works for me and my 5 little lab rats. Since starting my blog, I've had even more potential solutions than ever thanks to the great ideas shared by all my fabulous contributors. I have so many new experiments to try. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about some of my routine experiments, things that I've tried to change our mornings, our after-school routine, and our bedtime routine. I'm hoping that some of them will help you solve a problem or two. Before I start in on the routines, let's take a quick break to talk about our sponsor. How many times have you taken a gamble on a sealed package of underwear from a department store, the kind plastered with cartoon characters? I try to get my kids to pick the plainest, least garish design, but I usually cave to some hideous print that he or she just can't live without. After all, I figure, who's going to see it? Then, a few weeks later, the beloved, ugly underwear is stretched out, saggy and droopy, and can't be all that comfortable. And because I have a little one who thinks it's hilarious to run around in his skivvies, the whole neighborhood ends up seeing it anyway. Enter Lucky & Me, a children's clothing company that makes underwear that's both comfortable and cute. They're made of soft organic cotton, and they don't sag or wedge, even after multiple washings. I love them, and my kids love them. In fact, I need to order some more because suddenly they don't want to wear their old saggy underwear anymore. Lucky & Me is offering How She Moms listeners 25% off if you use the offer code HOW25 at luckyandme.com. Do your kids' cute little bums a favor and try them out. It makes sense to start with morning routines, mostly because it comes first. It's also where my family has had the most successful turnaround. Some of our experiments worked for a while and then stopped being relevant. Some failed quickly. Others are still going strong. But when I look at a tricky situation in terms of experiments, I actually get excited for them to happen so that I can try out my latest ideas. I'm going to share 11 of our best morning experiments. The first one is kind of obvious, but it's waking up early before the kids. Our worst mornings were the days that I overslept. I'd wake up in a panic and then frantically rouse the kids. That's a pretty rude awakening for anyone, and no one wants to have to rush to get ready. But now I set my alarm for 5 o'clock. If I've had a late or interrupted night, I let myself sleep until 5:30 or even 6. But this way, even if I sleep in, I'm still up before most of my kids. I usually do a bit of reading and writing and stick in a little laundry, and it's nice to just enjoy some time to myself before the kids get up. This way I'm actually happy to see my kids when they wake up instead of groaning and trying to get a little more sleep. Plus, now it's rare for us to have one of those rushed, woke up late mornings. Another experiment I started a few years ago was to have a breakfast schedule. We're a gluten-free family. I have celiac disease, and at least one of my boys does as well. So this limits our breakfast options a little more than most families, which can get pretty tedious. Plus, I like to send the kids to school with full bellies because you never know how much they'll eat in their short lunchtime. But figuring out what to make for breakfast each morning gets old really fast. So we have a set schedule each week: Monday muffins, Wednesday waffles or pancakes, and fried egg Fridays, which is actually eggs made anyway plus sausage or bacon. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, the kids make their own breakfast of cereal, yogurt and granola, toast, oatmeal, or eggs. This just allowed me to take some of the thinking out of it, and then at least 3 times a week, I'm making breakfast for them. The bonus is that on Monday Muffin Day, I can also send muffins with them in their lunches. The third experiment is to have staggered wake-up times. My 13-year-old now wakes up at 6 o'clock. This experiment started as a way to try to fit in more one-on-one time with him, so we can spend time together and talk about the upcoming day while he eats breakfast, makes his lunch, and gets ready for school. The added bonus is that he has loved waking up and getting his chores done early. When he sleeps in, his day just doesn't go as smoothly. He now usually gets himself out of bed, and he's even cheerful about it most of the time. The fourth experiment is morning snuggles. I used to go around at night and snuggle each of my 5 kids for a bit at bedtime, but that just prolonged our already too long bedtime routine. Plus, I was totally faking it. By bedtime, I needed my space, and I did not enjoy the hugs. But I actually really love snuggling in the morning when I'm refreshed. It's a nice, gentle way to wake them up, and we can talk about the day ahead. I start at about 6:30 and make my way from kid to kid. I also started bringing them a glass of water to drink right away because we rarely drink enough water around here. The 5th morning experiment was getting my kids to make their own lunches. This was new last year. For some reason, I always used to pack lunches for every kid. It took way too long and was often the reason we were late to school. After talking to some smart moms about it, I realized my kids are fully capable of making their own lunches, even in kindergarten, and they're more likely to actually eat what they pack themselves. So now I have 3 bins in my pantry and 1 in my refrigerator, full of everything they need to make their lunches. They just grab what they want. It's amazing. Thanks to a tip from my friend Jennifer, I also pack a lunch for my 4-year-old too, while everything is out. He feels big to have his own sack lunch, and he has a lunch ready whether we're at home or out and about. The 6th is iPad time in the car. So a couple of years ago, I made a rule that anyone who finished all their chores, including getting completely ready for school, cleaning their rooms and bathrooms, practicing their piano, could have iPad time, but only if they played it in the car. That way, they were already in the car and ready to go when it was time to go, and I didn't have to be nagging them to get off the devices. As a bonus, the others usually gathered in there to watch them play, even if they weren't done with their stuff, and I was totally okay with that as long as they were ready for school. Then when it was time to take the kids to school, I'd just saunter out to the garage. They're already all in the car and ready to go, and we'd go to school. This was a couple years ago. Now that they're older and have more self-control when it's time to turn electronics off, I let them use the computer or iPad in the house if they prefer. The 7th experiment was more of a structural thing: sock dispensers. There were several problems I was trying to solve here. One was that socks and shoes were making us late to school. My kids were always looking for matching socks or a missing shoe. I decided I wanted to keep both shoes and socks by the garage door. So we moved our laundry room downstairs, turned it into a mudroom with cubbies for each kid, including a place for their shoes. Then we added sock dispensers in the corner of each cubby. Just PVC pipes with a 90-degree joint at the bottom. Now the kids just stick their clean socks in the top and pull out fresh ones in the morning as we're leaving for school. The other big problem this solved was the problem of matching socks, which I hate. Each kid has their own type of sock, and I only buy packages of socks that are the same and don't need to be matched. The kids just put single socks in the dispenser and pull out 2 each morning. Instant matches. I'll include a picture of my sock dispensers on the blog post for this episode. The 8th experiment was to give 10 and 5-minute warnings. Now I make sure to announce both 10 minutes and 5 minutes before it's time to go out the door, just so there's no last-minute panic. This is their signal to get off the computer, grab their shoes and backpacks, and make those final touches on their hairstyles. Sometimes I set an alarm on my phone 5 minutes before we have to leave with the song from Home Alone, You know the scene where they're all scrambling to get to the airport. It makes us all laugh, and I dare you to listen to that song and not move faster. The 9th experiment was assigned seats. Thanks to more great advice from other moms, we no longer have skirmishes about who gets to sit where. The odd-numbered children get the preferred seat one day, and the even-numbered children get them the next. The 10th experiment was music. Honestly, our drives to school often used to involve long lectures on what went wrong that morning. Now, inspired by my friend Lori, who likes to play fun music to pump her kids up for the school day, we rotate who's in charge of the playlist on our way to school. I have 5 kids, and there are 5 days, so each kid just has a set day, from youngest to oldest. My kids love curating their perfect playlists. For the most part, they have great taste in music, and I'm pretty tolerant when it's questionable. But there are a few banned songs, like the really obnoxious ones. The 11th is morning story time. I've always been religious about reading to my kids before bed, but again, our bedtime routine has been getting really long. So I decided to read to my 4-year-old in the morning instead, after we get home from dropping kids off. Wow, it is so much more fun. For one thing, I don't fall asleep halfway through the book. We laugh and we interact way more, and if he wants more books, I'm happy to oblige. After-school routines are crazy for different reasons. Helping the kids process what happened at school, driving to after-school activities, homework, and hangry, overstimulated children, to name a few. Here's a list of some of these after-school experiments. The first one is preparing myself to be fully present. This is mom code for taking a nap. I used to use the last hour or two before the kids came home to finish everything I wanted to get done while they were gone. I'd come home from picking the kids up at school, and I'd just collapse on the couch for a while, exhausted. But that was the time they needed me to be at the top of my game. I finally realized that I should take my rest before they got home. Now, I take a quick 20 to 30 minute nap, or just sit and read a book right before it's time to pick them up from school. The second experiment is off-site car cleanup. I don't know about your kids, but mine have a tendency to scramble out of the car, leaving all their belongings behind, and run into the house. Then my car becomes this traveling pile of junk. So 2 years ago, I started doing off-site cleanups once in a while, especially when it was getting pretty bad. I'd make sure I had a garbage bag in the car and then also a bag of stuff to bring in the house. And I would park several blocks away from our house and announce an off-site cleanup. Then the kids had to go around and gather all their stuff and any other stuff that was in the car that went in the house and put it in the bag, and they'd clean up all the trash. Then when we got home, we could just bring the bag in and sort through it, throw the trash away, and since it was fresh on their mind, they'd all bring their backpacks and all their other school stuff into the house. Number 3 is to have a strategic dinner time. My husband works late almost every night, so he rarely makes it to family dinner. I know the family dinner is a sacred time for many families, and it actually took me a while to realize it just wasn't going to be a thing for us. Instead, we try to do family time right before bed. But without that restraint on our timing, I can be flexible and strategic with my dinner time. Once after-school activities begin, the actual time varies from night to night. But when we can, my favorite schedule is to have dinner on the table when the kids get home from school. I typically start cooking dinner at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so I have time to fit some rest in afterwards. I sometimes have to reheat a few things once the kids get home or keep it warm in the oven, Instant Pot, or crock pot, and do some last-minute prep. But when that's the case, I try to at least have some fruits or veggies out on the table for a first course. The 4th experiment is cleaning up after dinner together. I've tried many experiments to make this work. The one that's worked best for us is a wheel that rotates the jobs that everyone's in charge of, and we rotate it weekly. This is working much better now that the kids are older and more capable, and we're getting more successful at it. The 5th experiment has to do with planners. My kids have always struggled with writing homework in their planners. My first experiment to solve this problem was to charge them $1 every time they came home and they had a blank planner. But last year I realized that positive enforcement is probably a better tactic, so I've been having a planner check after dinner and then doling out gummy worms to the kids who filled them out. Then they get started on any homework they have to do. The 6th experiment is ongoing, and that is limiting extracurricular activities. Last year, I had 1 kid in robotics club, 1 in football, 1 in dance, and 1 in soccer in the fall. 2 of these activities involved commitments 3 times a week, including games. 4 of my kids were also taking piano lessons, and 3 attended weekly church youth group. This year, my 4-year-old wanted to get in on the action too and do soccer. And that's when my head exploded. It was time to get creative. I texted a couple of moms whose kids do football with my son and asked if their younger kids wanted to play soccer during football practice. My plan is to do a couple of little drills with my 3 youngest kids and their friends during practice, and then just let them play for the rest of the time. My oldest son will ride his bike to and from his tennis practices. All 3 boys will ride bikes to piano, and suddenly, I'm only driving to football twice a week and youth group once a week. This means I can actually be excited about fall because I won't be living in my car. Kristen Duke just released a great podcast episode about simplifying your family schedule, episode 75 of the Beyond Good Intentions podcast. She and her guest, Becky Proudfit, have a really thought-provoking conversation about how to figure out what activities to sign your kids up for and when enough is enough. One of my favorite things they talked about was scheduling family time each week and protecting it like you would any other kind of practice. Another related thing that I started doing a few years ago was to schedule one-on-one time with kids during other kids' activities. Sometimes this means just taking one extra kid with me when I'm dropping another one off at a practice. This obviously only works if I have a child old enough to babysit at home. Sometimes I bring them all to a practice, and then I just take turns spending one-on-one time with the kids who aren't participating, usually like 20 or 30 minutes at a time. So sometimes this means just pushing one on the swings or playing some tennis. Sometimes it's helping with homework or reading together or just going on a little walk. Last year, I had an especially frustrating situation surrounding after-school activities. My soccer player said he wanted to play soccer, and he enjoyed the practices once he got there. But he also really enjoys playing with his little brother and sister, so getting him to come willingly to soccer practice was a big struggle. It was a fight every time. Knowing this would be a problem, we even made him record a statement at the beginning of the season, right before we shelled out the fees, stating that he would come to practice willingly. But one week, I had to force him into the car for practice, and once we got there, he refused to get out of the car. Since I refused to drag him there kicking and screaming, there we sat, in the parking lot, and I eventually had to drive away with him still in the car. Worried that this battle would happen twice a week for the next couple of months, I racked my brain for a solution. Finally, with the help of some wise friends, I came up with this very simple experiment. We started getting to the park a half an hour earlier than practice started and let him play with his siblings at the playground. Then, when it was time to go to practice, it was an easy and natural transition. It worked like a charm. Then there's bedtime. Bedtime is always a big struggle for us, and I think it's because the circumstances are always changing. Now, I have kind of kids in 3 different stages. I have a teenager, I have elementary kids, and I have younger kids who really need more sleep than they're getting. Part of the problem is that I have no patience left at this time of night. I'm not nice at bedtime. Now that school has started, we've really been working on streamlining our routine and getting back to a reasonable timeline. Plus, there's the added challenge of basically dealing with jet lag from being on a summer schedule, staying up later, and going to a school schedule. So one of the things that we started doing is we kick off bedtime with a family devotional. This usually happens around 7 o'clock. My husband's usually home about this time. So for our family, this is our time to be together rather than a family dinner. It often still involves food because when we eat such an early dinner, the kids are hungry for a bedtime snack around this time. But it works out well because my husband can reheat his dinner and eat his dinner while the kids eat a snack. We use this time to discuss our day, read scriptures, and have a family prayer together. Thanks to a tip from a wonderful mom, Emerald Austin, we also now choose one family member each night and take turns complimenting that person. It's become a great end to our day. Another thing that I've experimented with a little bit, but I want to do more, is bedtime massages. Georgia Anderson, who's on Instagram as Know How Mom Tips, posted a video tutorial on her Instagram stories of how to give kids a goodnight back rub. I started trying it, and I found that it actually took less time than our normal goodnight routine, and it was really calming. But I do try to give my youngest son a back rub every night now to calm him down. Another thing that works for my youngest son is from the book Healthy Sleep Habits, Happy Child by Dr. Mark Weisbluth, which I love. He suggests that you recite sleep rules for little ones who like to pop in and out of bed at night. So each night, my 4-year-old and I recite the rules. Number 1, stay in bed. Number 2, stay quiet. Number 3, close your eyes. And number 4, go to sleep. If he gets out of bed more than once, I shut his door and, if necessary, hold it closed until he settles down. If he gets out of bed more than once, I go and sit in his room and just quietly, without making eye contact or interacting in any way, I just pick him up and put him back in bed until he gets tired of trying. The important thing there is to stay calm and not to give him either positive or negative attention. The fourth experiment is new because we just finished the reading nook in our basement. I've started reading the older kids a bedtime story in the nook before bed, and then I send them on their way. A fifth experiment that we started a couple years ago is to have a strictly enforced adult time. We started this because of my friend Molly, who's really good at enforcing a strict adult time rule, starting at 8 o'clock. So my husband and I are trying to do the same. The biggest shift for me has been using this time to connect with my husband rather than writing or cleaning up. We both need the break and the time together. We try for about 8:30, but it usually creeps to about 9. If our kids interrupt us during this time, we just tell them we are done with kids for the day and that it's adult time, and they've gotten used to that response. So these are just a few of the experiments we're trying at the moment. I have dozens of routines saved on my computer from different years, seasons, and stages, and every one is different. But it's such a fun challenge to identify what isn't working and to experiment with solutions until we find the ones that click. Inevitably, our routines will continue to evolve, and so will we. When they do, that's our chance to come up with some new experiments. Thank you for listening to the How She Moms podcast. If you like the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you'd head over to iTunes and leave a review to help more people find it. And tell your friends. You can find more articles, profiles of how different moms approach different topics, and a list of some of my upcoming topics at howshemoms.com. And I'd love to know how you mom. If you'd like to contribute your ideas to this community, you can email me at whitney@howshemoms.com. And you can follow me at Instagram and on Pinterest at howshemoms. Special thanks to my own mom, Susan Singley, for recording the theme music to my podcast. She played this song often as I was growing up, and to me, it's part of the soundtrack of motherhood.